is titled Out of Anatolia, Silver and Tin Trade in the Bronze Age, which is a topic somewhat nostalgic for me, given the many decades of research metals I have conducted, namely directing the excavations at Alalak and the Amuk Valley regional projects in southern Turkey. Nevertheless, the term out of Anatolia is apropos, and I'm very pleased to return to this topic since it is now possible to contextualize silver and tin distribution in the Bronze Age more securely within the metallurgical systems of Central Taurus-Cilicia and the Amanus axis. Recent scholarship has shown that the Taurus mountain range, specifically the Bolkardağ tin and silver production centers seen here in red, played critical roles not only in provisioning within Anatolia, but interregionally as well. The East-West Bronze Age Assyrian trading colony network has been well defined, and we have recently heard Gojko Baryamovic's Arwa talk documenting commercial systems using texts, thereby tying together Central Anatolia with Syro-Mesopotamia during the 3rd and 2nd millennia BC. Today, however, I will concentrate on another metal distribution system, a contemporary but ill-defined north-south exchange network operating especially along the eastern Mediterranean coast towards Egypt and even further west to the Aegean. Chronologically, my focus will be between 4000 and 1200 BC, the fluorescence of tin, bronze, and silver use in the ancient Near East. This exchange network operated through maritime routes as well as multi-directional overland caravans taking advantage of the Great African Rift Valley that runs from the Caucasus to Malatya in eastern Turkey, through the Amuk Valley, Bekaa Valley, Dead Sea, and down to Egypt. 40 years ago, I began a project aiming to characterize the sources of silver in the early Bronze Age, that is the 3rd millennium BC, predating the Assyrian trading colony system, which had 500 years later connected Ashur and Kütepekaneş from 2000 to 1700 BC. Lead isotope analysis use in archaeology was at its infancy, and very little of the ore sources in Turkey had been characterized. Source identification for the origin of silver, copper, and tin metals was relatively straightforward then. Afghanistan was said to be the source of tin. A generic Central Asia was added slightly later. Copper was invariably from Cyprus and Argani mine in eastern Turkey, while silver was said to come from Laurion in Greece. As a corollary, Hittite and Akkadian legends also pointed to the legendary Silver Mountains, but the Taurus had still not been investigated. In fact, most of the clues as to intensive metal distribution networks were mostly derived from texts and not from archaeometallurgical field surveys. Speculation was rampant about where the metal came from, and published maps with arrows running every which way were ubiquitous. This all changed starting in the 1980s when field teams put on their hiking boots and began a program of surveys, excavations, and analyses of the ore bodies relevant to the ancient Near East. As David Killick said in a recent webinar on African metal sources, and I paraphrase him, it is crucial that sourcing analyses start with the geology and then move on to the artifacts. Actually, I started with both simultaneously in 1981. The Central Taurus Mountains in general, and specifically Bolkardağ, was the first target. But the tourists were full of surprises, not the least of which were the levels of tin analyzed in its polymetallic ores. Recent analyses have provided data showing that silver and tin production and their distribution from Bolkardağ, Kestel and Hisarcık mines had taken place at a scale not previously anticipated. But the notion that tin sources in Anatolia were important enough to provision the Bronze Age was met with strong resistance, and it took some time for this fact to be accepted. This attitude towards new discoveries was historically noted previously by Max Planck, who stated, quote, "A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it," unquote. And so 40 years have passed. What do we know about silver and tin trade today? Scientists have now begun to look closer at the geology and the age of the tin deposits, which are defined by lead isotope ratios. The million square kilometers or more of the earlier generic term, quote, Central Asia, have recently become much more nuanced, as this orogenic map indicates, which I will return to later. In Turkey, my colleagues and I began an archaeometallurgy project in the 1980s to characterize the lead and silver sources in the Taurus Mountains, which also dealt with the surprising trace findings of stanite tin in the polymetallic deposits. This photo on the left was taken opposite some of the 850 silver mines mapped by the Turkish Geological Survey in the Bolkardağ Valley from one of the Iron Age sites we surveyed above the famous Bulgar Maden inscription. On the right is a photo taken as we sample one of the many outcropping veins containing stanite tin, argentiferous lead, zinc, copper, and iron, that is, a natural polymetallic bronze. But producing bronze with this ore would be difficult, I was told. Thus, after initial skepticism of the usefulness of stanite tin, with the help of the Turkish geologists, cassiterite, or easily smeltable tin oxide, was documented northward along the Ecemiş fault line at Castell Mine near Çamardı. The tin discovery at Castell was wildly successful and became the cover story in the journal Science. Running parallel with the instrumental analyses of the ores, the source identification project focused next on the artifacts, targeting silver and tin bronzes of the 3rd and 2nd millennia BC. My colleagues Hadi Özbal, Edward Sayer, Emil Joel, Bob Brill, Linus Barnes, and I put together a massive database of lead isotope ratios and compositional data at the Smithsonian Institution and the then National Bureau of Standards. Production patterns began to emerge immediately. For example, the co-occurrence of silver and tin in the polymetallic deposits of the Taurus had echoes in the polymetallic artifacts produced from these ores. Case in point are the earliest tin bronze figurines from Tel Cudeyda, dated to 3000 BC, and a contemporary crucible with tin bronze prills analyzed with 37% tin metal content from the same site in the Amuk Valley, the plain of Antioch, southeast of the Taurus. Not surprisingly, the lead isotope analyses of the silver helmet from the figurine in the black box confirmed a Taurus silver source in proximity to Castell Mine. Glimpses of the co-occurrence of silver and tin in the same artifact can be seen in exotic alloys as well. Note the tin content in this silver torque from early Bronze Age Göltepe, the miners' village opposite Castell Mine. Silver artifacts were an important, coveted preciosity, and silver was not only a medium of exchange in the ancient Near East, but silver artifacts were ritually charged, as is evident from the Hittite relief-decorated silver stag-shaped vessel. Moreover, mountains were deified during the Hittite Empire and later during the Neo-Hittite Iron Age. Thus, it is not surprising that King Warpalawas, mentioned in the Bulgar-Maden inscription, said he gifted the mountain he called Mount Muti, which is the ancient name of Bolkardağ, to his vassal, wishing it to be beneficial to him. And you can see King Warpalawas in the Ivriz relief on the left slide, and he's the smaller image there. And the Bulgar-Maden inscription to the right, located below the chasm facing the silver mines in Bolkardağ, I showed you in the earlier slide. Lest you forget, lest you think I forgot the West, that is Western Anatolia, the Aegean, and Greece in this paper, I present two artifacts made of silver, the famous stag vessel from Mycenaean Shaftgrave IV, and dated even earlier, the early Bronze Age silver and gold treasure, Heinrich Schliemann, found at Troy on the right, both made from Taurus silver. This graph shows lead isotope analysis ratios of artifacts from our database, suggesting a source in the Taurus. And I have to thank Wayne Powell and say that this graph shows the best fit of all of the other ore bodies we also tested as well. The plotted sites on this graph are Tarsus, Göltepe, Ashur, and I will return to Ashur in a few minutes, the Mycenaean stag, and Acemhöyük. The massive site of Acemhöyük is on the caravan route traveling westward from Bolkardağ, and where the sampling of a Middle Bronze Age silver hoard plotted within the same source, demonstrating some of the overland linkages of Taurus silver. But what were the mechanisms of trade for Taurus silver moving westward to these locations that can be revealed by the isotopic connections? Scant information exists about maritime routes this early, but important research was published about overland westward caravan routes by Efe and our host, Vasif Şahoğlu. Overland trade in the opposite direction, eastward, was also documented with lead isotope analyses, demonstrating that Taurus silver reached Assur in northern Iraq in the 3rd millennium BC, predating the Assyrian trading colony networks, as we saw on the previous graph. By the 1980s, the silver mines of the Taurus were well researched and published, but the question to be asked was, Where were the tin mines, trace levels of which showed up in the Bolkardağ analytical programs? The niggling question of tin deposits in the Taurus prompted me to reorient my team to investigating the first-tier production centers from the Bolkardağ Valley northward along the Ecemish Fault Zone to the aforementioned Castell Mine. Together with geologists from the Turkish Geological Survey, a team of archaeologists joined by members of the British Historical Mining Society, the early Bronze Age tin mine complex, and the miners' village Göltepe were excavated from 1988 to 1995. Castell Mine, which you see mapped out here, was 4 kilometers long, following the veins containing the highest tin content, branching in all different directions and in multiple elevations within the Nida Massif, an unexploded volcanic dome. Narrow extraction galleries were mined with fire setting, some only 60 centimeters wide, using gabbro and diabase stone tools. Within these soft, carvable limestones and tuff, and you can see the slide of the volcanic landscape of Cappadocia and the early Christian monasteries and villages nearby in Niğde, Nevşehir, and Kayseri. The ore was cassiterite, that is tin oxide, and I have to point out that there's a red variety on the bottom and a black variety as well. And this cassiterite is within hematite braided in quartz veins and washed out as alluvial deposits in the Kuruçay stream below Castell Mine, which is 2 kilometers away. The early Bronze Age tin miners settled on the fortified 60-hectare Göltepe Hill opposite the tin mine. You could see the tin mine Castell up there on the right. And way at the bottom, and I've taken the photograph from Göltepe itself, is the jeep, which I give you for scale on this 1,500 meter altitude mining site above. At Göltepe, the miners carved semi-subterranean pit houses roofed with wattle and daub, leaving behind metallurgical tool kits and crucible bowl furnaces in situ, demonstrating where they ground the ore into powder consistency and stored them in large storage jars and one-handled cups. We found the ore contents were carefully color-coded from purple to pink, corresponding to the amount of tin content. In addition, 50,000 groundstone tools were documented and 5,000 stemmed from excavated contexts. The smelting technology was labor-intensive, using crucibles or bowl furnaces for the smelting. 1.5 tons of tin slagged crucibles were found at Göltepe and Castell. SIMS analysis showed the entrapped tin metal prills inside the crucible fabric. And the white areas you see here are all the tin metal that has been absorbed into the fabric of the crucible. We reproduced this simple bowl furnace technology with the help of the Egyptians and Brian Earle from Cornwall, using homemade blowpipes and ground ore, which was actually found at Göltepe. Clay blowpipe nozzles were found at the excavation, as well as molds for axes and chisels. At about 900 to 1,000 degrees centigrade, and after 15 minutes of blowing, we were successful in producing prills of metal entrapped in glassy slag. This experiment defined the simple technology behind the first tier of a Highland tin production model, after which the cast ingots or semi-processed ores got shipped to sites in the urban centers to shape into their own idiosyncratic styles of bronze weapons and tools when combined with copper. I turn now to the topic of provisioning silver and the relationship of this first-tier tin production complex in the Taurus to the silver sources of Bolkardağ and Uludağ. The extensive silver mines at Uludağ are in the Taurus lead isotope analysis group and were never far away from the tin mines, as this photo taken from on top of Göltepe, the tin miners' village, demonstrates. But the Taurus and its related volcanic systems held even more surprise beyond the silver sources. It is widely known in archaeological circles that in the right conditions, volcanoes produce obsidian, but the unknown was that it produces tin as well. And this is a slide of the stratovolcano Argeus, or Argeus in classical literature, in fact now known to be a major second source of Anatolian tin. A new research project was launched in collaboration with Professor Fikri Kulakoğlu and his KAYAP survey team in Kayseri to investigate this tin source in 2015. Playing hooky from my excavation at Uludağ, I joined the team of geologists and archaeologists and began to survey this most unusual occurrence of tin at Hisarcık. How astonishing that it should be in the backyard of Kütepe Kaneş, 26 kilometers away, with its sophisticated caravan trade network defined by over 20,000 old Assyrian texts, documenting the textiles and tin imported from an undefined source in the east and exporting Anatolian silver and gold to Ashur in northern Mesopotamia. Amazingly, the cassiterite tin was interspersed among a newly identified mineral, yazganite, named after its geologist discoverer, Evren Yazgan. Yazganite is defined as a combination of arsenic, iron, and very high values of tin. And you can see this in the PXRF, that is a portable X-ray fluorescence analysis. The Hisarcık mines revealed evidence of extraction and show the remnant tin, iron, and arsenic oxide mineralization. We documented many galleries at Hisarcık, and among the surveyed mounded sites, a potential Bronze Age one called Tekne Kayası in proximity to the mines. Pottery from these sites spanned the 4th through the 2nd millennium, including the late Bronze Age, and yielded the entire metallurgical toolkit of processing ores, just like at Göltepe. This begged the question of whether the Assyrian trading colony network cut off local production at all. Our new project now will test whether other local actors were at play simultaneously after conducting new tin isotopic analyses from Kütüphane, which will be published in a future article. And I thank Fikri Kulakoğlu for agreeing to supply new samples for this. This was the state of research, and articles about these Anatolian highland tin sources as of 2015, with the Hisarcık announcement published in Antiquity. 3 more publications followed. 1, a mineralogical study of Castell. 2, a detailed lead isotope analysis study of the additional Uluburun shipwreck tin ingots, and the Götepe excavation volume published by Instap Academic Press, which appeared in 2021. Now let's move forward to the Late Bronze Age, the 14th century BC, and maritime metal trade. I was approached by a group from Brooklyn College, namely Wayne Powell and his colleagues, who had been working with Eastern European tin sources. They suggested that it would be important to deepen the research into tin sources with new lead isotope analyses and the application of a relatively new method, tin isotope analyses, to specific samples of tin artifacts from the well-known Uluburun shipwreck off the southern coast of Turkey. Cemal Pulak, the former director of the underwater excavation, kindly gave us new tin ingot samples, and thus began a new arm of the research into sourcing tin in 2018. Earlier work by the Gales had already noted the lead isotope analysis overlap of some high-leaded tin ingots and tin objects from the Uluburun shipwreck with the Central Taurus ores. But at the time, this connection had puzzled everyone, since the Taurus-Hisarcık second millennium BC mines had not as yet been discovered. Concluding that perhaps it was the lead that was being sourced, the Taurus linkage was thus shelved. However, after the new study of these Uluburun specimens were reassessed and new lead isotope analyses and tin isotope analyses conducted, the source origins of the tin changed dramatically. Between 1984 and 1994, at least 117 ingots, or roughly 1 ton of tin, was raised from the Late Bronze Age Uluburun shipwreck, dating to roughly 1320 BC. Over half of the analyzed ingots from this site have high lead concentration, and by that I mean over 100 parts per million, indicative of contamination from non-radiogenic lead associated with lead metal or galena. The new samples and their lead isotope analyses, combined with previous analyses, now indicate that this lead in the tin isotope, which is the red blobs, originated from the lead silver rich Bolkardağ region of the South Central Taurus Mountains. A second group, and you can see the yellow blobs out towards the right hand of this graph, of approximately 28 tin ingots with lower lead content, that is less than 100 parts per million, contains original uranogenic lead, overlaps with the approximately 300 million year regions of Western Europe and Central Asia. Based on our evidence, the second source in Central Asia is most likely in the Tian Shan Mountains spanning Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. These source areas are now being confirmed with new data forthcoming in our article number 2. It's finally possible to visualize the bimodal provisioning model of the Uluburun tin ingots, not only from the South Central Taurus, but also from the Tian Shan Mountains in Central Asia, dismissing previous notions of a single source. We are now working on resolving overlapping locations by multivariate independent statistical analyses of 4 variables, that is, the trace elements of tin, 2 isotopic ratios of lead, as well as tin isotopes. We have initiated collaboration with regional specialists in contemporary Bronze Age Central Asian settlements, as well as applying analyses on nomad mobility patterns to determine the mechanics of how the tin from Central Asia and Tian Shan and Altai sources came to be on the late Bronze Age Uluburun shipwreck. Archaeologically, the takeaway from this is that 2 sources of tin were circulated in the Eastern Mediterranean in the late Bronze Age via the Uluburun shipwreck. The coastal cities of the Eastern Mediterranean served as important components of maritime and terrestrial distribution nodes, provisioning tin originating from the 2 geographical regions. In the Taurus, we argued in our paper that if tin ore was being transported from dispersed mines, such as Kestel and Hisarcık, to other locations to be processed, given its easy access to the Cilician gates, settlements in the vicinity of Bolkardağ represent a natural aggregation center within a local metallurgical network. Sites such as Porsuk in the Bolkardağ Valley could have served as markets and workshops where small-scale and/or seasonal miners offloaded cassiterite as well as other varieties of ores. A late Bronze Age argentiferous lead ingot mold from Porsuk, and you see a photo of it on the upper right, and the yellow diamond on the graph, yielding an isotopic match to Bolkardağ, provides additional evidence for metallurgical activity in this region. It is possible that small-scale producers conducted preliminary smelting of ores at any of the myriad smaller settlements in the South Central Taurus Massif, and then took the product to a central market and transported them to ships. This raw metal would have been in the form of small ingots or assortments of amorphous prills and agglomerations, as frequently produced in small-scale smelting operations. To return to the other metal in this linked metal trade, and that is the silver and lead artifacts in our database, there is an artifact sampling bias for the Bronze Age. However, enough lead isotope analyses exist for silver and lead artifacts in our database to reconstruct Middle and Late Bronze Age silver distributions in a north-south maritime route from Cilicia and along the Levantine coast, west to the Aegean and south to Egypt, originating from the source area of Bolkardağ in the Taurus. The analyzed artifacts from these nodes of connectivity are from coastal Tarsus, Alalakh, Ras ibn Hani, Ugarit, Sidon, Halat Sultan Tekke in Cyprus, and Abydos in Egypt. To reiterate the route, two parallel production and distribution systems seem to have been in place: an overland caravan route as well as a maritime connection. What about the archaeological cognates? And I return now to my Columbia University training for the merchants or agents in this trade. According to Stefania Mazzoni, these rather ugly cylinder seals called Syro-Anatolian linear style, and you can see Ugarit on the top and on the bottom, an example from Alalak. These linear style seals are evidence of mercantile administrators. These seals have been found from sites far in the north, such as Kütepekaneş, near Kayseri, and up and down the Levantine coast and across northern Syria. They are really quite ubiquitous. Curiously, all are the seal stones and rarely ceilings, but with this important door sealing exception from Tel Bia, ancient Tutul, has led Stefania Mazzoni to suggest that these seals may be the official devices of the tradesmen or administrative agents of the state themselves, used as an identity signature. So were these administrative tradesmen roaming in an interregional Middle Bronze Age commercial network separate from the Assyrian trading colony network? It certainly bears thinking about. Tying into this narrative slightly later, recently Eschel and her colleagues have shown that during the early Iron Age, Phoenician traders exhibited a particular interest in the silver deposits of the Central Taurus, with the hoards of both Tel Dor and Akko yielding a combined total of 17 artifacts linked to Bolkardağ. From this production zone, tin and silver was distributed to the coast and picked up by a myriad of ships, one of which was the Uluburun, and it is possible that there were more. And this is certainly seen in Oniz's underwater survey and his investigation of the new Middle Bronze, Late Bronze I Kumluca shipwreck, which has provided new information as to the magnitude of this trade by plotting locations of Bronze Age anchors. The Uluburun tin ingots and their subsequent reanalysis indicates that significant volumes of tin were being produced from the remaining smaller cassiterite deposits in the South Central Taurus region. I thank the anonymous reviewer of our Journal of Archaeological Science paper who said, and I quote, "The source or sources of tin for the Bronze Age has been one of the major issues in the archaeology of the Near East and the Eastern Mediterranean for nearly 50 years. The reviewer goes on to say, the authors provide evidence that lead 208, 204 do not evolve significantly after crystallization of cassiterite, which means that the value this ratio in tin can potentially be matched to lead 208, 204 ratios of sulfide minerals. They use this insight to argue successfully, in my opinion, that many of the tin ingots on the Uluburun shipwreck derive from the tin sources in north central Turkey that have been the subject of so much past controversy. I have to say, if you're interested in the mechanics of and the chemistry and the geology of this very complex system, please refer yourself to the supplemental materials in the Journal of Archaeological Science, which you can see there. To conclude, as the 3rd and 2nd millennium BC textual sources which identify the Taurus Mountains as the legendary Silver Mountains, the people in this region would have had the skills, the expertise, and the natural resources necessary to process ores and provision them to various urban centers. What is new is that we have identified and focused attention on the Central Asian source in the Tian Shan Altai Mountains. And this is the first application of combined trace element together with lead and tin isotopic statistical analysis to mining process reconstruction and network analysis in a surely much more complicated bimodal distribution center than we had thought before. Thank you very much.
Aslıhan Hocam, thank you so much for this amazing interdisciplinary work, which is surely opening and going to open more windows and new perspectives to the archaeology of Anatolia and Mediterranean and Near East in a wider perspective. I now stop.